Hey y'all, it's Ashley. Welcome back to my channel. I am joined here today with some pretty cool people. If you guys don't mind, go ahead and reintroduce yourself or introduce yourself, I guess I should say.
Go ahead, Chad. You're the guest of honor.
Hey, my name is Chad Nicholas. I am a horror and thriller writer so far, and I've written two books, Nightmare and Shade, and they've both already been released. Nightmare is a horror one, and Shade is more of a crime thriller with detectives and serial killers and stuff. And I've got a couple other projects in the works too. So,
Really?
Oh, I'm excited.
We're going to find out about that. So I am Steve from Steve Talks Books. I like to read horror and dark fantasy, grimdark books. And I like to talk to people, so I'm glad to be here to pick Chad's brain about Shade. I have lots of questions for him.
I have so many thoughts. I mean, I can't. I don't even know where to begin because first of all, and this is probably bad saying it, but I love true crime. Like I don't like the fact that people die, but I love just that whole encompassing thing, like what makes people tick. So when you contacted me about reading this, there was no way I could pass it up. Like I immediately had to. It was going to be yes automatically. So, do you want to go first asking questions, Steve, or do you want me to go first?
You can kick us off.
Okay, so what inspired you to write Shade? I'm gonna do like the first 15 minutes spoiler free, and then after that we can kind of go into spoilers.
okay, that's good. So some of the stuff's hard to talk about without spoilers. Uh, but So Shade was actually the first main book idea I had. I had the idea for Shade probably at least a year before I had the idea for Nightmare, even though I wrote it second. But I had the idea that I wanted this. I had the idea for the ending, which I can't say because of spoilers, but I had the idea for a cool way to take the serial killer and detectives hunting him because there's been a lot of books and stuff that deal with detectives going after serial killers and it deals with how that would affect you. But I wanted to kind of take a few of the aspects like hallucinations, mentally unstable, and really lean pretty far into it and see how it could change the dynamic of the hunting the serial killers. And I also really I love the idea of playing with timelines, of having the aftermath be shown because you have the first timeline, which is the investigation into the original serial killer, and then the second timeline, which is completely dedicated to the aftermath, who these people became after the story wrapped up. And the idea of being able to kind of cross-cut some scenes and play with past and present at the same time and reveal certain twists and character developments at the same time in both timelines really seemed exciting to me. That's actually why I wrote it second, because I wanted a little more familiarity with writing as a whole before I tried to cross-cut the stuff. But overall, it just seemed like a really fun concept. And I also really like the trope of like one-man army. So like John Wick, Rambo, Punisher. And I wanted to take that and make it, instead of it being the hero trying to protect the person, it's the one coming after them. And I wanted to kind of play with that concept and do something different.
I don't think it's spoilery to say that it's very cinematic. It was like reading a movie. Was that intentional to have that kind of? It was almost like you could see everything clearly as you were reading.
Yeah, I really like visuals. Even like in my head, all of the books start out as movie ideas. Like I see it as a movie. Like this would be an awesome camera angle. This is how, like during the it's not a mass spoiler. There's a fight scene in a prison. During that, the whole time I was like, I would want the camera angle to be behind this person. It would move this way. This is how it would go. And then I use that in my head to be like, okay, this is what would be on camera. So this is what I should write. Sometimes that made some of the fight scenes fairly long because I described quite a bit of it. But certain times it worked well. I think it was a balancing act.
I have to say I really enjoyed that. And for me, when I read a book, I mean, it depends on the book, but most of the time I like feeling like I'm just kind of like transplanted into the story and like I'm actually there in that point of view. And so I thought that was really interesting, especially the way that you did the two storylines and like, anyways. So before we dive in a little bit further, I want to ask: are you pretty much a true crime fan? I mean, do you have a pretty extensive knowledge as far as when it comes to serial killers, or what was your process with this book?
I do like, sorry, I do like true crime. I've watched some ID, like the ID channel and stuff like that. Typically, I'm more of a fan of fictional detective stories
Hmm.
because then it's more, you can get more outlandish with it. And like Zodiac, Seven, Prisoners, I really like the gritty detective kind of stuff. And that's something I've always been a big fan of. And then there's also, I mean, like all of the 90s detective movies, a lot of them are very similar and have some big flaws, but I still really enjoy them. And a lot of it was just coming from, I wanted to do everything that I really liked and then take some of the stuff that always kind of bothered me and try to work around it and either avoid it completely or the one of the main reveals later in this book came about because I was like, I see this happening fairly often, but I always can't stand it because I don't like the way it's done. So I was like, I want to try to do this because I like the concept, but I want to try to write it in such a way that it makes it work more to me than it has in the past. And then also, I just like foreshadowing detective stuff. So being able to like have detectives looking at the clues and stuff was really fun and playing with the serial. Plus, I love the trope of serial killers. Like sometimes even when they're caught, they still have effects and stuff. So that was a fun concept to play with too.
Yeah. And did you study? I don't think it's too spoilery to say, but did you study like police work or like interrogation techniques and things like that as you were writing the book?
Not so much. I have I got something in the throat. I've have some like I've researched it before. I didn't do a lot of specific research for any scenes in Shade. It's more just because I've read a lot of detective books, movies, and just enough this ID true crime and stuff that I've watched. I kind of have a general idea. I did some research about like what the FBI would specifically investigate, stuff like that. As far as interrogation techniques, that was more just relying on prior knowledge of other interrogation scenes and also just how I felt I would try to go about. Because I haven't, like, when I'm looking at it, I know what the serial killer knows. So I'm like, I know this, so how would I go about trying to get this person to say this? And I kind of know how the serial killer thinks too because I'm writing for them. So I'm like, I try to give the detectives an idea of they can kind of react intelligently in scenarios because I'm trying to make it where they pick up on some stuff that wouldn't necessarily be obvious, but because of the way the story is, it wouldn't be unrealistic to imagine they'd be able to come up with and do.
Yeah, don't want to get too specific. If there's a couple of things that we'll talk about in spoilers that I was pretty impressed with your with scene in particular, but we'll talk spoilers.
I'm just saying the ending caught me off guard. I'm usually pretty quick to figure things out most of the time, like 80% of the time, and I probably screamed. I'm not exactly sure because, like, you're just in the zone. You get just consumed by the story. Yeah, and anyways, we'll talk about that later. But, um, is there anything y'all want to tackle before we get into the spoilery bits? Because I'm kind of, I
I'm kind
can't
of
wait any longer.
looking over my notes, and I think all of it is spoilery.
Yeah,
So I'm
I
trying to.
know.
Well, I can ask one thing I did wonder as I was reading is how you keep track of all the different storylines and how you keep track of all the different characters. How do you? What's your process for that?
Well, for originally, I do a lot of it in my head. I'm having ideas, I'm playing over it, and I tend to remember things that I really like. So I keep trying to work on scenarios just play them out, figure out what I'm going to do. I keep notes on my phone just to make sure I don't forget anything, because I don't trust that I won't have a great idea and then the next morning have no idea what it was. But when I get to the point where I'm actually outlining for Nightmare, I didn't have anything else, so I just wrote a bunch of stuff on sticky notes and then arranged it. But after Nightmare, I bought a big whiteboard that can flip, and I have color-coded markers. So like for Shade, because there's 2 timelines, I drew like a line for the timelines, and then at the top in black I would write present timeline, at the bottom in blue I would write previous timeline, and I would try to do it. I have a separate section for this is the chronological order of events, these are the foreshadowing stuff I have to put in, and then I make little character notes in red ink depending on it. So like I try to color coordinate the chapters too. Shade's chapters are in black, Sarah's are in blue, Jack's are in another color, and then go with that. Sometimes it works out good. Sometimes I wish I had a little more space still, but I try to fit everything in. And a lot of it's just when I'm trying to write chapter by chapter, I just write everything I know I want to do on the board, and then just try to be like, okay, well, which of these steps should come next?
So let's keep track of.
So you're a pantser then, not a plotter? Or are you a little bit of both?
No, I'm definitely a plotter. I
A
outline.
plotter.
Even after I have the whiteboard outline, before I sit down to actually write, I have a separate little notebook. And I open up and I'm like, this is exactly how this chapter is going to play out. I write opening scene, this, and then I've done chapters without doing that. It just makes it better, because then I know I'm not having to come up with stuff that may not be good. I know this character is going to say this because this foreshadows this later. They're going to find this clue because this clue would be left at this time. And I'm not. That was actually funny. At the beginning of writing Shade, the past chapters they were added early but later than the present day chapters. And I noticed on a lot of my outline, I had just wrote Shade and Jack at crime scene. And I kind of knew what the killer was doing, but I didn't know what specifically is at this crime scene. And it was really hard. And this will be something I can go into more with spoilers, but one of the main reveals in the past timeline changed, because as I was trying to make up something for a chapter, I was like, wait, this is way better than what I was originally going to do. So then I went to outline, then I outlined the entire past chapters again, more specifically with the new detail, and then it all made sense. So then it was much easier once I had it written. Okay, I don't have to come up with the clues they find, because I know ahead of time this is when they're going to find each specific step. It makes outlining, foreshadowing, and twists much easier.
Oh man, I want to find out what that was. So I do have one more question for you before we get into spoilers. Is you have a Nightmare and Shade both have a twist, and I'm one of the people who love it. I think it's great because I can never see it coming. Do you ever feel like you have to write a book with a twist to not disappoint people like me and Ashley?
No, I don't feel any need to write a book with a plot twist, but at the same time, I really love plot twists, and all of my favorite ones have them. So most of my book ideas start by, both Shade and Nightmare, I was like, this would be an awesome twist that people wouldn't see coming. And then I'd build the entire story to get to it. Like literally all of Nightmare was written to get to that twist. So it's not something I feel I have to do, but it's something that every time I see an opportunity, I'm probably going to do it.
That's good to hear.
I can't wait any longer. We're going to have to go into the spoilery bits. Sorry. All right. So from here on out, if you guys haven't seen or heard or read the book yet, then please, number one, it's on Amazon. Go check it out on Amazon. Number two, I linked the book trailer down in the description. I went, yeah, there we go. But yeah, definitely check it out. I thoroughly enjoyed it. But now I just want to talk about, this isn't really a spoiler, but I want to start out with Sarah, because after that first chapter where we're thrust in the past and they're chasing the serial killer in the forest, and then you switch over to Sarah. I just thought like you did that so well, number one, but number two, as someone with PTSD, you captured it perfectly. And I was just wondering, is that something that you just kind of went with, or?
Well, I realized that gummit. Sorry. I realized pretty early on that I wanted Shade's character arc to be the reason he kind of snapped, and I guess if this is spoilers, the reason both Jack and Shade have issues was because of the stuff they had seen trying to hunt down a serial killer. And I knew I wanted Shades to originate from his war background and kind of carry over from that, where the detective work just makes it worse. And when I had Shade as that, and then I was like, well, I want Jack to be kind of the reverse of Shade, where they're both had the same path but took different solutions to the problem. I was like, well, I knew I wanted Sarah to be more than just the person that the story is going after because she's being hunted. I wanted her character arc to like matter. And I thought because I already had two, I wanted to make it like three characters with the same issue. So Jack, Sarah, and Shade had PTSD from different events and how they all deal with it. Shade can't move on, so he's kind of trapped in this. He's not breaking down because of it, but he's also not close to stable. It's not healthy. Jack found a solution, but it's a very bad solution, and he kind of went off. He's the next step of what Shade would happen if Shade let it go. And then Sarah was kind of just stuck in depression of she doesn't feel like Shade and Jack where they could still move on. She just felt trapped where there was nothing she could do. And then that way throughout the story, Sarah overcomes her obstacle of this is how she can live. She can like move on and get past it. Because of her, Shade kind of not perfectly, Shade still has issues, but he finds a balance. And then Jack is the only, even though Jack originally seems to be the one who dealt with it the best, he's the only one who couldn't actually accept the correct issue, and he just went too far down to get out of it. So I thought having all three characters have the same character arc but end up in different ways, I thought would be a cool, interesting way to go with it. Then Sarah having a completely separate character arc that didn't tie in.
The interrogation techniques specifically, I think there was a few portions of the book that I was convinced you had researched because I was a criminal justice major, and some of the things that you mentioned are the things that we studied in school. So I thought that was pretty neat.
Yeah, like I said, I didn't do any specifically like for an interrogation, but I do know just out of curiosity, I've looked a lot of that stuff up before and been like, this is how people interrogate because of this. You need to get inside the head, do this. So it was kind of just, I tried to use that base knowledge of, based on what I know, this is how I would interrogate this person. So I tried to, and I did want it to feel somewhat realistic where like the cops talk about things that they would actually talk about. So like when they're saying we need to interrogate this person, they kind of know how they're going to go about it to try and get the information without being too confrontive, but also, or I don't know if confrontive is a word, but confrontational. But at the same time, I tried to find a balance. Plus, there will be other books eventually where I'll have to write more interrogation scenes. So I tried to figure out how to. Plus, that's one of my favorite things in movies, like detective movies, whenever the serial killer is being interrogated. And it's just, you know, they know something, but you're completely at the mercy of if they're going to tell you, like Silence of the Lambs, Seven. So I really used kind of those as my baseline of this is how I want this scene to feel. And I didn't know you were a criminology major, but that's pretty cool.
Yeah, long time ago. Yeah, long time ago.
Yeah, I am not a criminology major. I never was, but I did study in psychiatry for a little bit, and I even took like a business class or two for law. So like some of the stuff that was being said in some of the interrogations, it's just like, is he an insider? Like, does he know things? I'm not. I'm not positive.
I'm glad
But
it felt that way.
yeah, my husband actually is a detective for the county that we live in. Yeah, so I was asking him a bunch of questions like, "Does this really happen?" He's like, "Kind of." He's like, "Who are you talking to?" I'm like, "Nobody. I don't know."
That's funny.
So
And I have to agree. Derry says hi, but she said those are great films to find inspiration. And I was gonna say, the Silence of the Lambs is probably one of my first like thriller scary movies that I've ever saw.
Yeah, I never watched it until I think like a year or two ago. But when I did, it was before I wrote Shade. But when I did, I was like, "This is really good. Why have I never watched it?"
It's messed up, especially. Oh, I just feel bad for Clarice, but anyway.
Yeah, she goes through a lot.
Yeah.
I've never seen it. I need to watch it one of these days.
So there was another part. Okay. As far as with the hallucinations and stuff, I swear, like, I'm not a serial killer or anything. I just have PTSD. So, like, I get it. But throughout this whole entire time that I was reading this book, the hallucinations were just spot on. Like, I seriously thought that you could have just plucked it out of the book and it was realistic, like it was real life. And I just thought that was so neat. I was literally nerding the whole entire time about it, even though I'm like, ooh, there's things there that aren't there. He's hallucinating. Like I'm feeling a little paranoid, but being able to feel that in real life is like awesome.
Yeah. The hallucinations actually, they started because I was wanting to do something cool with action scenes, and I was like, I want to do something like unique where the like I wanted to give Shade a reason where yeah he can fight a bunch of people, but there's also something that's like wrong with it. And I'm also a massive fan of a Scarecrow from the DC Comics. I want to write a Scarecrow book at some point if DC Comics ever lets me. But I like the idea of like fear-driven hallucinations, and I knew that cops having hallucinations of victims and stuff is like something that's been touched on before in films, even in like the Heat, the old Robert De Niro Al Pacino movie. It dealt with that some, and I was like, I want to do this, but like kind of like the action really turn it up. So I was like, I want to have it where it starts out with Shade and Jack just both being slightly off, and then by the end of it, Jack has got so insane he sees everyone dead but doesn't react to it, so that's super creepy on his part. And then Shade just can't handle it, so he's freaking out and like sees things that isn't there. And I wanted to like play up that aspect of it, and I thought it made some of the action scenes cool, and it gave Shade and Jack realistic motives for why they would break down so quickly.
And one of the things that really got to me is, I'm sorry, Ashley, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm breathing. I'm just taking a breath. Yeah.
Okay. I was going to say the fact that they got so close to the case and they were pressing and they were trying to solve it and they started to not see things that were in front of them. Seems like something that would actually happen too, because you want so badly to solve it, but then you don't see the obvious signs that happen. So I thought that was like that would happen kind of moment. Like that makes sense.
Yeah, I definitely wanted it to be where, like, by the end of it, at least with the original case, it wasn't that the serial killer was like, it's not like the surgeons were the smartest serial killers ever. It was just because of the gruesome nature of what they were doing, it just made the case so much worse that because they were clever with the switching out, both Jack and Shade on their best days would have seen it no problem, but it's not. The hallucinations made it where it's not unrealistic that it took them that long, and then they made some mistakes that they shouldn't have, didn't. Because one thing, I don't like it when movies have detectives not see clues for the sake of just extending it of, oh yeah, it's a really smart detective, but he didn't notice this thing. So I wanted to give some of it a reason of this is why these two people are very unstable, so they're doing the best they can.
Yeah, I guess you add to that they were unstable, so that they were struggling with other things too.
Derry said, Steve, you've never seen Silence of the Lambs. I know we can't talk to him anymore.
Oh, I know. You're gonna kick me out of here, but no, I have not. One of these days I will.
One of these days.
One of these days.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Horror and thriller movies used to win more Oscars than they do now.
I know.
It's
I
sad.
know it. It's so sad. True life. Yeah.
Mhm.
Needing court-worthy proof. Yeah, that's something that I talk a lot with my husband, is that just because they have a hunch, they have to have some form of pinpointed location, whether that be their phone's GPS or, something like that. And so for my husband, he specializes in like the tech part of it. So he does like search warrants for phones and like does phone dumps and cell tower stuff. And I was happy when I read this book. I was like, you need to read this book. So I'm hoping, fingers crossed, maybe.
Yeah, that'll be cool.
Yeah, be like, okay, so can you tell me? Because I mean, here in the past year or so, he has worked with other agencies, so it's not like he's just strictly working with just the sheriff's department. So seeing the interactions between agents and between shade and and law enforcement, it just kind of makes sense. It's just like this perfect environment for everything to crumble.
Yeah.
And the buck thing, that was so cool. The buck, we can, the letters, the names. Was that always the plan, or is that one of the
that's actually the thing I changed. I was sitting there, and I knew I wanted the endings. To me, the surgeon was never the most important part of the book. Jack was the killer who and that's the thing. The original concept was I wanted to do the detective's been the serial killer the whole time, but I don't like it when movies do it because it's always like they just pull it out of nowhere, and it's like, yeah, how was I supposed to see this coming? And I wanted to make it where the entire book is about Shade becoming unstable, and then the whole time, because the book mentions, like, I have a line in there where Jack thinks we're like, it's never the obvious ones who are insane, it's the people who are faking it. So that way I can kind of hide Jack in the background, where when he does turn, it feels like it's where the story should go. So it's not like I just pulled it out of nowhere, but it also is the shocking twist. So because of that, I never put like, I knew I wanted the surgeon, I knew what I wanted him to be doing because I wanted it to be horrific. I wanted it to be reverse aging because I thought that was a cool concept. But I originally was still just planning on having it be one surgeon, and they just found the wrong person, made a mistake, caught it. And then as I was writing the flashback scenes, I wrote a scene where they interviewed Dr. Urich, who at that time was actually Dr. Stevens. And I was like, he was just going to be a suspect. He wasn't going to do anything. And then a chapter or two later, I was like, well, I want them to talk to the parents of one of the girls. So I wrote Carter, who at that time I just called the father. And then when I was going over the thing of when they was putting up all of the suspects on the thing, I was like, I have them mention that originally they mentioned that both Carter and Urich knew each other from a hospital. And I was like, I wonder if they would want. I was like, I wonder if it would cross their mind that they might be working together. And I was like, crap, that's actually better than what I was gonna do. So I walked, because I was just gonna have it be like a person at the end. So I walked in, I flipped my whiteboard over because I hadn't wrote anything on the backside, and I outlined the entire rest of the flashback chapters. I was like, I have 2 killers now. I was like, I already have the scenes in there where they interrogate them, so I can leave it in. I went through, I was like, this is this, this is this. They're swapping victims. This is why they can't catch them. This way they can interrogate one, and the mistake they make isn't that they catch the wrong person, but there's still a person who's outside who can kill Nora. So it just made everything click. And then as I was doing that, I had already written that the killer had left that note that said John Buck. And I just wrote that because I needed a name off the spur of the moment. I was like, John Doe is a name that's been used before. I was like, I'll do John Buck different. And when I realized there was 2 of them, I was like, Buck has 4 letters. I was like, can I spell out his name? And as soon as I wrote it down, I was like, okay, I've got to do this now because it just sounded cool. So I changed Dr. Stevens to Dr. Kevin Urich, made the father Benjamin Carter. And I was like, it's one of those things that, like, if it was me, there's no way I would personally spell their names out of order to get it. But after I saw it, it would drive me crazy from then on that I didn't do it. So I was like, this is one of the things that I want to do because I know it's going to hopefully bother the people.
How long did that take to go back and to redo all that and to replot that out?
To replot it only took a day. To re-edit it took a couple. Although, again, a lot of the scenes that I actually wrote stayed mostly the same because they were suspicious of the doctor and the father. It wasn't as obvious that it might be something. And then once I realized it was that, I knew one way or the other people would probably suspect either Urich or Carter. So I knew I didn't really have to hide the fact that they were suspicious. So I just had both of them act as suspicious as humanly possible. That way people would, because in my mind, it didn't matter which one people suspected. The twist is that it's both of them. So I could really force it. I didn't have to, like, because one thing detective movies do, sometimes they kind of don't show the killer that much. And then it's like, oh, this person's been the killer the whole time. And it's like, I didn't know what that character's name was. So it doesn't really, like, shock me. And I was like, the twist is that's both. So I wanted Urich and Carter to both be in the story. They keep coming up. It was hard finding places where they would mention their full name because I wanted to give people the chance to know their full names. So that way, when I do the buck, it doesn't feel like I cheated. But finding scenarios where they called this person, hey, Benjamin Carter, Kevin Urich, it was hard to find. That's why I kept having them look at suspect lists, and I had at some point the detective ask them what the people's name was, because I tried to find reasons of, when this twist happens, I want people to have known where they're like, oh yeah, that's how their names are spelt, not, oh wait, his name was Kevin, because then it's like, what was the point? So I tried to find as many places to say that as I could.
Well, that's cool. That's neat.
I just want to say, I mean, I know we're only 30 minutes in, but I'm highly impressed. I didn't think, especially that ending scene where you have Sarah and Jack, and then, okay, we're doing spoilers, but anyways, how, Shade's trying to go after her and save her, and then Jack's just going through his whole spiel. That was so cool to read through. And I mean, but it's so true of, and you could correct me on this, Steve, but it's so true of criminal behavior, or even just, forensic behavior issues. So I was impressed.
Yeah, I really like that again, the scene between Jack, Sarah, and Shade is the first idea I had. Like, I knew this is how I want to end the book. And then when I did to do 2 timelines, I was like, I don't want to end the past timeline and then do the new timeline. I was like, I want Jack to be revealed to be the serial killer at the same time in both timelines. I was like, and to do that, I have to cross-cut it. And there's not many examples of how to do it mid-sentence and mid-paragraph. And it took me a while, but finally I realized that if I made the past in italics, it made it flow way easier. Mm-hmm. And then once I realized that, I would outline, like the scene where Jack's talking to Sarah, and then in the past he's about to kill the woman. I just have it outlined of, this is where this section stops and ends. And then I try to, because I thought about writing the past and then the present and then cross-cutting them, but I found it worked better to write it as it went. So I was having to flip from, this is what Jack does, flip to present day, Sarah's thoughts, flip back. And it was difficult to write, and especially because when the fight is happening between Shade and Jack, and it starts cross-cutting past and present mid-sentence, I wanted that to work where it works mid-sentence, but also if you took out all of the past chapters, the present still works with itself too. And to do that, I was having to make sure the ending of one sentence matched the beginning of this sentence and the beginning of another sentence. and then these two sentences also match two other sentences. And to find places where it took a lot of diagramming of like writing the sentences and piecing them together for how to make that work. But I thought it'd be cool.
Very effective. It does another part that really reminded me of a movie where it flashes back and forth, but it was kind of reminding me of House of Leaves, the different techniques that was in House of Leaves to kind of give you that feeling. That's the same feeling I had reading those scenes.
I've never read that book, but I've heard everyone who's read it said it's great. I need to check it out.
It's a journey.
Take your time if you read it. But yeah, that's something that I really liked as well. It's just how everything went together so smoothly. Like in the end, like it's so easy to follow through with it. And I don't think that most books do a very good job with that. So I think the fact that you were able to pull it off is pretty cool.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry, Ashley, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask Chad about his writing style, because all of your books, Nightmare and Shade, are very smooth to read. They're very easy to read. Are there things that you do when you're writing to make it a really smooth and easy read?
I think it's mainly the type of prose that I like reading is a lot more, not simple, but it's more straightforward. I'm not having to sit through a bunch of paragraphs that I don't really understand and look like because I've read there's been a few of the older books that I've read where I start reading it and it's just like, it's written well, but it's just sometimes it makes me put out a lot of effort to get there. And I've always felt if you can say this character ran away, you can just write this character ran away. There are times, especially with Shade, I wanted to get better and I wanted it to have some more really descriptive scenes, some really like dynamic writing in certain areas, but I want to get better, like writing and description. I want to keep making it better and better, but I also don't want to lose sight of the fact that personally, I like it to not be super crazy. Just keep it descriptive, but also like fast paced, simple. Don't write 2 paragraphs when 1 sentence would have been okay. So, especially for like thrillers and horror, because I think that's important.
So when it comes to the scenes where, especially like in the beginning and the middle of the book, where we have this action-packed kind of stuff, was there anything outside of, like, were there any movies that specifically inspired stuff like that? Like, I know earlier you mentioned Silence of the Lambs, but like, what was...
For the action scenes, probably for it, the ones that most, I really love the idea of like continuous one take fight scenes. So like John Wick, I love that franchise. The way they like stylize action is incredible. I really like Daredevil. Some of the fight scenes in Daredevil with the hallway, just one person consistently getting more tired. And then also with some action scenes in Punisher 2. And then I really like the Batman Arkham games, the combat system there of like how it's quickly paced and like certain takedowns and stuff, but it's not crazy. So I tried to work all of that in, like even in the prison fight scene, you can see some of it because like it's a hallway. So it's like the fight scenes in Daredevil and Punisher that are in a hallway, but then it also has some like arm breaking, some more grounded, gritty stuff like the Arkham games, and then overall, as a whole, I wanted some of the gunfights to be stylized. Plus, I tried to work on making each action scene a little different. Like the first one, all the lights are off, so it kind of plays with darkness of if they can see Shade. The next one, it's the prison, so it's just him counting down 25 people. And then the next one, it's more gunplay, him trying to work his way up a room. And it's funny, the 3rd floor, I originally wrote as just another gunfight, but I was like, that's too similar to what the first 2 floors were. So I rewrote it to be Shade fighting ninjas, and I really love that scene. And like the fighting moves in it are really cool, but when I reread it, I was just like, why is there ninjas here? So I had to rewrite it a 3rd time, and I changed it to where they're not shooting, so it's more hand to hand, but it's also not full on throwing stars and stuff. And I found but I kept the scene of the ninjas because at some point I'm gonna need that because it did some cool like fighting stuff that I liked too much to throw away, but I knew it didn't match the tone.
That is hilarious.
That's
I
great.
love ninjas. You couldn't have gone wrong with ninjas either. So
It's like, where do the ninjas come from? Who cares? There's ninjas.
Yeah,
they're just there.
ninjas.
Okay. Well, and if I remember correctly, this was when Jack and Sarah were going to see, what was it, some sort of mob boss or like cartel or
Yeah.
So the cartel has ninjas, I'm sure. Like
Yeah. I wrote it in there as they were like some assassins he'd hired, but
yeah.
still I'll just reread it. I was like, yeah, this doesn't work, but I would be totally up for it. I was like, but I don't think everybody's gonna feel the same.
Well, when I was reading, I actually, especially in the prison scene, I felt like I was actually in the stack with like all the other agents. And because, with me, myself, never personally been into law enforcement before, and hearing that from law enforcement and military types, you can only just imagine like just how intense, and you really brought that intensity during those scenes, especially with the cartel. That was like him just like going up, and you can't see these people dying, but you can hear them dying. And elevator scene, I just thought that was so smooth.
It's funny. The whole reason I added in the mob boss was because I kept having to figure out because the whole time I paint Shade as the bad guy, but I can't have Shade murder people because he's not actually the bad guy. So I kept having to find excuses for why he can kill people, but it not be like morally disingenuous to the twist. So I bet I can have Jack say that he won't kill FBI agents. And I was like, and that'll probably slide. I was like, but I can't do that more than once. So I was like, prison fight scene, the inmates attack him. I was like, it could be argued that that's self-defense. And I was like, and then cartel mob boss, that's just open invitation, works out perfectly. So the entire reason Burroughs was there is because I wanted that scene, but I knew if it was FBI agents, I'd keep having to make up non-lethal ways for Shade to take them down. I really wanted to just be like, nah, he just headshotted them. And it's actually cool. The idea where he has the strobe light flashing on his pistol, and when it comes up, shoots. That was an idea I'd had for a scene in a Star Wars idea I had of lightsabers turning on, hitting someone, turning it off. So like the lightsaber going on and off does the night and day. And then I was like, well, that might not happen, but if I put it on a gun, I can do something similar. So
that was really cool. I like that. It was really neat.
Derry said, I love hearing you inspired yourself.
Yeah, it's funny. You find a lot of the ideas that don't work for other things always can come back at some point.
Isn't mystery a key element of ninjaing?
That is true.
I think it is. That's all about it. Well, I'd have to say another one of these, along with really reminding me of the Silence of the Lambs series, it reminded me a little bit of the Sherlock Holmes. While, I feel like with Silence of the Lambs, it's a lot action packed, but with Sherlock, it's like you really got to think. And this was like the perfect combination of the two. Was that hard for you to balance out, or did you at points find that difficult to kind of figure out?
It was definitely strange because I do love Sherlock Holmes. I do.
Yes.
Actually, it's sad. Sherlock Holmes is in the public domain, so I could write one. I just don't have any ideas for a Sherlock Holmes story specifically, but hopefully one day I do. But it was, to me, the balancing of the present day where it's more of an action thriller of there's not a lot of mystery. The serial killer is more of like a action thing. Balancing that, combining that with the detective work was one of the things I was most excited about. It's also one of the things that was hard because if someone goes into the book who only likes detective work, I found that it's they then don't like the present day as much, and then they feel it takes away. And if you only like the action thriller, then you think all the past stuff is just too talky. So I tried to strike a balance. I don't know if it worked for everybody, but I tried to make it where the stories tie together enough that even if you don't love one of the two genres, like I necessarily do, you can see how they play off of one another. And I think both helped each other on the pacing, because I got to have the one really quick action scene, extended, cool fight scene, and then back to slow paced, find another clue, and then alternate. So that seemed to work good too.
Well, and for me, it really allowed me to see, just how Shade reacts in certain environments, and kind of get a full perspective of him. And Jack too, because I know he's got some background in that as well, but I don't know. I feel like this is just a complete and total gush. I'm sorry. I liked it. I hate that I don't have anything bad to say, but oh well.
I wanted to ask you, Chad, once you have the twist, so you start with the twist and then you kind of work your way backwards and build a story around it. Who do you tell? Do you tell anyone the twist, because you don't want it to get out, right? So how long do you have to keep that to yourself? That must be like torture.
I don't tell anyone the twist because my family reads the books first, so my two brothers and parents, and they're all like me where they like trying to see twists coming. So I treat it like a game between me and them. So I don't tell them the twist because I want, if all four of them don't see it coming, then I think I've done a good job. So I use that as there has been one or two twists that I've mentioned, one in particular that I mentioned to someone because it's going to be a little bit before I get to that book, but it's strange. So I wanted to tell someone to make sure I wasn't insane for thinking it could work. So I did do that one, but it's one of those that it's very hard to describe. But overall, no, I'd keep it to myself. That way, when I write it, I can see the genuine reactions of the people and the beta readers and like that, to see if they can see it coming. That way, because I want to make sure the twists, since that's the thing that I care about probably the most, I want to make sure that it's done in a way where it's foreshadowed, and once you know it, looking back, you can see all of the places where it was set up, but it's also where it's not necessarily easy to see the first time.
And Derry had a good question.
She said, has your family ever figured it out early enough for you to want to edit again?
Nope.
See, I wouldn't be able to do that. I'd have to tell somebody because I can't. I'm just terrible at secrets. I don't know.
It's definitely hard, especially when like I'm working on it so long. And it's like I've been talking about the book in like general, like I'll say the title for like a year and a half, and then I start writing it for months, and then it's just like, when are you going to finish it? We want to read this. And it's like, it's taking time, but I don't want to tell you because it all depends on the twist. But no, it's great. And like that's the thing, when I watch movies, I always love trying to figure out, like detective movies, mysteries, I like trying to figure out the twist as quickly as I can. And typically it's something that like I'm fairly good at. I can be like, I guess I've seen enough movies, I'm like, oh, they said this, so that's going to tie into this, and then try to guess the plot twist within like the first 10 minutes. So whenever I'm writing one, I try to be like, if I was reading this at this moment, well, like for Shade, I was like, if I'm reading this, I'm going to immediately assume, because of the way the story goes, that one of the detectives is probably a serial killer. I would make that guess pretty quickly. I was like, but if I told myself, like if the book told me Shade is a serial killer from the first page, I'm going to assume that that's an unarguable fact. So then my idea that one of the detectives is going to be a serial killer wouldn't happen. So then I'm going to be so distracted trying to figure out what Shade and the surgeon is that I thought I would probably overlook the Jack thing. And that's kind of how I try to work it around. Even like the surgeons, I was like, the John Buck thing is something that I wouldn't see. But as soon as I realized it, I would be like, dang it, how did I not write that down? So I try to make it where I try to like guess where my mind would be at every scene and try to work the story around that to see if I can because like if I can figure out what people are going to think at all the different points, theoretically I should be able to then manipulate it to hide certain things. So I put a lot of effort into trying to figure out when certain things and when people would be thinking about different twists.
Nice.
I basically write them with the expectation that if someone goes in, that everyone's going to go into it expecting a twist, and that everyone's going to pay attention to literally everything.
Mission accomplished. And you mentioned your work. What are you working on now? What can you tell us about what you're working on? And when can we get our grubby hands on it?
I'm actually working on the main one that I can talk about. I'm working on a slasher. I mentioned at the end of Shade that I think in the author bio I mentioned I was doing a slasher, but it's going along pretty well. I've got a couple drafts of it finished, so I'm going to send it off to an editor in a month or two. And the reaction from a few beta readers has been pretty good so far, so it's looking like it's turning out nice. And it's a slasher, so it's quite a bit different than. But I mean, Nightmare and Shade were pretty different from each other, but this one's pretty different too. But it's got some of the same mystery elements, stuff like that. So it was really fun to ride. It's got kind of an investigation. It's got a cool slasher villain. It's got a bunch of like slasher horror tropes, but also some of it done in different ways. So it's something I'm really excited about.
Oh man, my wallet's hurting already, and I haven't even gotten the book yet.
And I am still outlining the sequel to Shade, because at the end of I think I have it here. At the end of the book, I have that tag of there being another one.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, that was nice. I like those.
It's going to be a little while, but I'm working on it. It's also a pretty complex story.
So, and if you can't say, then that's fine. But will the story be continuing with Sarah and Shade, or will it be like the same kind of like universe but different characters?
It will continue with the one that's mentioned. So the one that's mentioned at the end of this one, it will continue with Shade and Sarah.
Okay.
So it was funny because Shade was never meant to be like I was just gonna write Shade. I thought it worked really good as a one-off, and I had an idea, and I was like, I had another idea for a different story, and then I was like, that would require a character who has this type of character arc, and then it fits so perfectly with Shade's character that I was like, this is a really interesting way to take him after the events of this, and it kind of leans into all of the aspects that are already in his character of like, yeah, he's better now, but there's still stuff that could happen, and just because Jack's been dealt with, there's a lot more that could be done and a lot more that could happen. And there's some, because I knew it ahead of time, I put a decent bit of foreshadowing in this one, and I set up a lot of pieces that I know that I was going to need later. So there's some stuff in Shade that's there to set up, to work with Shade, but also to set up stuff later. So that way, because I didn't want it to be where it's like there's stuff that serves no purpose, that's only there to set up a sequel. But also, since I knew the sequel, I knew certain characters, certain characters and character arcs, I knew where I would want them to be. And I kind of tried to subtly set up, this is the pieces that I'm going to need for the next one. So I want them to go ahead and be there. But
I like how you're choosing your words very carefully there.
Yeah, the sequels, like I said, I never planned on a sequel, and I never want to just write a sequel for the sake of writing another one. But when I had the idea, it's an idea that I'm really excited about. And I think in some ways, the direction the story goes and the new serial killer that is involved in the story is much darker and much more complex of a motive than the surgeon. So it's something I'm excited for whenever. It's taken a while to outline, but we'll get there.
Nice. Looking forward to it. And Ashley's back.
Yay.
Am I back? I'm not sure.
But you're back. Yeah.
Well, Pixely. Oh, that's perfect. Well, I'm afraid I don't know what's happening, But I missed that whole last part. But I'm assuming you were talking about the next book in your Shade sequel.
Yeah, I was dancing around the plot, but
Yeah.
it's gonna continue the character arcs. I set some stuff up
Well,
in
that's
Shade.
probably good because I like to be surprised.
Yeah, so it'll work out, but like I said, I'm still outlining it, and I know most of what I want to happen. There's just some
Awesome.
things that I'm working around, so I'm excited for it when it comes.
Cool. I think Ashley's frozen again. I think that might be our cue, Ashley. I don't know if she can hear us. Can you hear us okay, Ashley?
Yeah. I'm frozen.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you want to? We can probably wrap up then.
This is a bummer. I'm sorry.
Oh, internet connection's never trustworthy.
Yeah, it's a bummer.
It always dies.
Part 2 coming next week. No. Well, I appreciate you guys.
Thank you all for having me on.
Thank you, Chad. Sorry, Ashley, you had an
I think
internet
it's
issue.
just trying to self-sabotage.
It's Shade
Yeah.
of his little tricks again.
Yep.
All right. Well, I am going to go ahead and close out. Thank you guys so much for joining me. If you can still hear me.
We can still hear you.
It's okay. Well, y'all have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too.
You too.
Thanks, Chad. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Appreciate it, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. See ya.